I think the beauty of who God is really is that it's very personal. But for me, who God really is clearly defined in the New Testament, in the Bible. And I think it's a case of really being able to see God, or allowing yourself to see God means that you've really got to stop a little bit and maybe just put the brakes on the stuff that's already running through you, and just, like hit the pause button somehow with every other thought you've ever had, and just say, okay, I'm going to approach this with a fresh start, and give him the opportunity to maybe show me a different side. And the picture to me, the most clear one, that anybody who knows me is obvious, is Luke 15. And in Luke 15 we have this parable called the parable of the prodigal son, but it's really not the prodigal son. It's all about the prodigal father. Prodigal means reckless and with abandon. That's actually what the word means. And so everybody said, well, the prodigal son ran off and spent his inheritance recklessly with abandon. He just, he had no regard for it. He just spent it all so crazily on all the wrong stuff as well. But really what happened in that story is so multi-layered, and there's so many cultural pieces to it that we've just never grasped before, and I certainly had never really heard until like 2008. And God's added more and more to that over the last few years. But the Hebrew culture is very specific. God gave the Hebrews some very clear, defined details of how they were to live life. And those defined details were there as a structure. And the structure was there to basically allow an environment to form. And the environment was there so that every child growing up within that environment would grow up with a certain experience. And that experience set them on a path to really know who he was. And for the most part, unfortunately, us, out of our long way away from that Hebrew culture as our foundation, most of us have had the wrong environment. Well, in the picture, there's this father who has two sons. And the crazy thing is that he's actually a really good dad. But this younger son goes to him and basically says, he says, I want my inheritance. Well, we all know what a will is. A will is for when somebody dies. You don't get stuff from a will until they're dead. And so really, in essence, what he was saying to the father was, he was saying, I wish you were dead. And that's a huge insult when you think about it, for a son to say to a father, I wish you were dead, give me the stuff I would get if you were dead. And in the Hebrew culture, the actual right response to that, under God's direction, was that they would take the son out, and the father would actually be responsible for taking the son out and stoning him to death. Not because the son was evil, but because the attitude of heart is what God always seeks to correct. And the attitude of heart is truly the spirit of a person. The attitude of heart with which we approach life is the spirit that we walk in. You can pick up on someone's spirit, in essence, just to give it some context. If someone walks in the room and they're very, very angry, you pick up on that. We can sense it. That's what's happening. That's a spiritual thing. The spirit of the person almost creates an aura around them that literally, that is their state. And as human beings built by God, we're built to pick up on that stuff. And so God was always about disciplining the attitude of heart. And because of the extremely rebellious nature of that statement, that was the kind of response that God had set in place. Because he knew that if you allow that kind of attitude of heart to continue and to grow and to fester and get stronger, it will have an effect on the culture and mess with the environment that I'm creating. And so he was not being a big, bad, mean God doing that. He's actually a very protective father. And so here's this father in this little parable in Luke 15, and basically what he does is he jumps over everything that he knows. So everything in the Hebrew culture is screaming at him at that moment, you've got to take responsibility, take your son out and stone him to death. But instead of doing that, he flies in the face of everything he knows and gives the inheritance to the son. So right there's a huge demonstration of this father's love for his son. And then secondly, not only was the father responsible and the family responsible for doing that to the son, to discipline that attitude of heart, but the entire village would know what had transpired just by the way that the son walked out of town. He walked out of town with this huge bag of loot. And you didn't walk around town with a huge bag of loot. That wasn't the normal everyday experience. So they would notice that because it was a tight-knit community. And so they knew as well what had transpired just by that. And so their responsibility too was to take him out because of that attitude of heart. It was all about disciplining the attitude of heart. It wasn't about hating the person, it was about the attitude of heart. This is not going to bless us. This attitude of heart is going to cause a rift.